Last weekend, 3 different world-class clock solvers broke the world record, but somehow, none of these records even counted. So, what happened? Well, the main reason why all these cubers almost got the world record is because the current clock records are not very good, and the current clock solvers we have are too good. This is clearly shown when you look at the history of clock world records. You can see the time slowly going down, but take a look at all these records that happened within 2 months, with 2024 starting off with 5 new world records in clock. So how did clock go from the most hated event to a puzzle that's so competitive right now? One reason is hardware. This started in 2018 when magnets were added to the pins of the clock. Then in 2020, the G clock was released. People didn't know what quite to expect because clocks were so bad, but this clock was a huge upgrade. Not only were there magnets in the pins, there were magnets in the clock dials. The turning was also so much better, and almost instantly, a record was broken with this new clock, with Yunhao Lu's first ever sub 4 clock average. He would continue to dominate this event for a while, with 2 more world records, including the first sub 3 clock single. But this all changed around 2022. Around this time, most people still solved one piece at a time, and had a flip in the middle of their solve to solve the backside. But interestingly enough, there was a method that was already invented that fixed this issue of flipping. In 2016, a video was posted about this advanced clock method, where you don't need to flip the clock. Instead of solving the cross on one side and flipping it over, you would solve the cross on the back, which eliminates the need to even flip over the clock. This was pretty cool, but with this method, another interesting concept was brought up: the use of simultaneous moves. When you introduce solving pieces on the back, you can start to solve pieces on the back and the front at the same time. This is done when one pin is up and one pin is down. Those dials can be moved independently, which allows you to do 2 moves at once. But for the longest time, this method was known to be something cool but not really practical. This is until Caleb Trelford started to prove this method in competition, breaking countless North American records after another. But he still wasn't able to beat Yunhao Lu's record using the classic flip method. But on July 29th, 2022, this happened. With an average of 3.81, Caleb just broke the world record using a completely new method. Shortly after, however, Jacob Chambers broke the record again, this time going back to the old flip method. As good as no flip sounds, the old flip method seems to be just as good. This method had to be improved on, and later in 2022, it was. The problem with the old flip method was that you aren't doing 2 moves at once all the time. To optimize this, 2 moves should be done at once for every stage of the solve. With this idea in mind, 7 Simo came along, with the idea of solving all 14 pieces in 7 simultaneous moves. Once again, you don't need to flip over the clock, but you're doing even less moves. One of the people that pushed this method forward was Tommy Cherry, and on June 17th, 2023, he proved this method is actually really good. His 2.61 world record was the first ever with 7 Simo. Nicholas was able to get a world record average with this method, but Tommy broke it shortly after. This started Tommy's reign of clock, holding both the single and average world records, becoming the US national champion, and becoming the world champion for clock, all within a few months. In 2023 though, people were realizing that clock solves with 7 Simo were pretty good, but the one main flaw was that the bottom moves were pretty hard to do, which is why around this time 7 Simo with flip was invented. This will take the best of both worlds for flip and 7 Simo. The solve is still 7 moves, so you're being perfectly efficient, but the flip would allow you to not do those crazy D moves with your pinky, which allows you to spam turns much faster. While most people didn't switch to this method, there were a few people that got pretty good results with it. But there's one huge change in 2024 that caused the huge spike of records we saw this year, and that's a new WCA regulation. A logistical issue with clock was that whenever a clock falls over, you can mess up the pins. This is frustrating because if the clock falls when you lift up the cover, that would have to be an extra solve. And if it happens during inspection, or you accidentally turn a pin during inspection, now it's a DNF. There were even covers designed just for clocks, but they didn't fully fix the issue. With this in mind, the WCA allowed turning pins during inspection. There were mixed opinions from the community. While it would be a good idea and save a lot of time with extras and DNFs, this would give a huge advantage to clock solvers, who can essentially do their first move during inspection. People disagreed on whether it should be in effect, but one thing was for sure. With this regulation, there's going to be a lot of records. And a lot of records there were. The first record of 2024 was on clock, by Neil Gore with a 2.54 single, immediately showing that this regulation would help cut fractions of a second off your time. Shortly after, Edwin Shan got the world record average with a 3.47, but just an hour later, Nicholas broke the record again with a 3.44. And the same thing would happen again. On February 17th, Dilshan broke the world record with a 3.35 average. And on the same day, Niklas breaks the record again with a 3.31. And just over a week later, he breaks the record again with a 3.13. These records might seem impressive, but they're nothing compared to what people are averaging at home. Here's when 3 of the best clock solvers come into the picture. If you search up the world best for clock, you'll probably run into 3 people: Carter Thomas, Volodymyr K, and Brendan Dunnigan. Carter is a previous NAR holder, and he's known for turning really fast and using 7-time will flip, and he has had some averages that were pretty close to the world record. Volodymyr seemed to come out of nowhere. Just last year, he had a 14 average in clock, but suddenly that turned into a 6 average, and then a 4 average, and then a 3 average. But at home, he was posting even crazier averages, sub 3 and sub 2 singles. Brendan might be known for square 1 and being an all-rounder, but he definitely excels at clock as well. After learning 7-time, he's also been posting some pretty insane averages. The YouTube clock records pretty much rotated between these 3 every other day, it seemed like. However, none of them have gotten the world record yet, but that can change on April 6th, when each of them are competing at different competitions. Up first was Carter Thomas. His first round average was okay. It was sub 4 but at a counting 5. Let's see how he does in the final though. First 3 solves are pretty good. He gets a counting 2 but also a DNF, so there's a lot of pressure heading into these last 2 solves. Then a 3.37. He just needs one more low 3 to get the world record average. And a 3.01 definitely gets him the world record average. But that last solve was a missed scramble, just being off by a tick. And with the E1, there was a lot of nerves, and unfortunately he DNFs it. But next off was Volodymyr. In the first round, he got a 2.71 national record single, but the average wasn't that great. In the final, he got a counting 4, so he was going for a good single here. He destroyed the world record single of a 2.22, but unfortunately he didn't do the last tick. There are no plus 2s like this in clock, so it's a DNF. But Brendan Dunnigan was looking to redeem himself after a poor performance in the first round. He gets a pretty similar start as Carter. 2 great solves, but 1 bad solve. Meaning there's a lot of good potential here, but also a lot of pressure to make sure that 8-second solve does not count. It was a great solve, but when the judge flipped the clock over, it was a DNF. Also just by 1 tick. On the last solve, he gets yet another great solve. But once again, when flipping it over, it was discovered to be a DNF. Without these DNFs, it would have been a 3.01 world record average. Stanley Chapel described clock as being the hardest WCA event back in 2019. And this has to be even more true now. Not only do you have so low room for error, with it being so easy to mess up 1 tick, you have to do memorization and simultaneous moves, which partially explains why all 3 of these cubers DNF'd some of their solves. But with how good these cubers are, it's not a question of if they'll get the world record, but when. Thanks for watching, guys.